Noah, only 9 years old, trembling hands, forced to grip a pen in the dark, signing a paper he couldn't understand. Across the table, the man he was told to call uncle held a gleaming knife under the flickering light. The house, once a place of warmth, had become a battlefield where bloodlines turned into weapons. In that chilling moment, a child was forced to grow up, and a mother had to fight not just for a home, but for the soul of her son. You're about to enter a haunting journey where silence may preserve a house, but also cost you everything. Before we begin, hit subscribe to never miss the most intense and emotional stories we bring to you. My name is Marissa Clark. I'm 38 years old, a third-grade teacher in Colorado Springs, and a widow. I don't say that word easily. It still catches in my throat like a shard of glass even 6 months after the accident. Widow sounds old, like a woman who's had time to prepare for loss, who's raised her kids, buried her spouse with dignity, and now wears grief like a well-fitted coat. That's not me. Dean died on a Thursday morning in November. It was icy dark and far too early for the highway to be full. A delivery truck, jackknifed on black ice, spun out across 3 lanes and crushed Dean's car under the weight of 10,000 pounds of steel and misjudged timing. It was instantaneous, they said, as if that made it better. I was making Noah's breakfast when the phone rang, the kind of ring that hits different. You know before you even answer it that your life has split into before and after. That day, I made scrambled eggs with toast. I remember because Noah didn't finish them. He was staring at the syrup bottle, tracing the label with his finger, saying nothing. The officer's voice on the other end was calm, too calm, a tone rehearsed for bad news. I dropped the phone mid-sentence, my hand clenched so hard around the kitchen towel that the fabric tore. Dean was gone, just like that. The weeks that followed didn't feel real. There was a blur of casseroles, sympathy cards, the funeral I barely remember. People talked at me, not to me. Everyone kept asking what I needed. I needed Dean. I needed time to rewind. I needed someone to stop looking at me like I'd been cut in half. But mostly I needed to stay upright because Noah was watching. Dean was a builder, not by trade but in soul. He worked at an auto shop during the week, did freelance carpentry on weekends. He was the kind of man who believed hands could heal things, who built furniture from scratch just because he hated cheap plywood and thought kids deserved solid places to grow. We didn't hire contractors for our home. Dean built it. He spent 2 years saving up materials, another year pouring foundation on weekends, framing by flashlight, laying tile with music blaring from a dusty old speaker. The first room he finished was Noah's, not the kitchen, not our bedroom. Noah's. He carved stars into the headboard by hand because Noah liked looking up when he was scared at night. He stained the wood dark blue so it feels like the night sky even when the curtains are closed, he said. The house is simple. 1 story, small porch, creaky floors that Dean never got around to fixing. But it's ours. Every wall holds a memory. Pencil marks on the pantry door show Noah's height at every birthday. The hallway still smells like the lemon oil Dean used on the banister. The dining room window was once shattered by a rogue football. Noah cried. Dean laughed, and I stood frozen somewhere in between. Now every room echoes too much. Noah doesn't talk about the accident. Not directly. Sometimes I catch him staring at the spot where Dean used to park his truck. He'll whisper things to his stuffed bear when he thinks I'm not listening. Sometimes he sets 2 plates at the table instead of 1 for me and 1 for him. He still sets 1 for his dad. I haven't corrected him. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. It coils, it waits, it ambushes. 1 minute you're folding laundry, the next you're on the floor holding a flannel shirt that still smells like the man who made you feel like the world made sense. And then just as quickly you remember you have a kid to pick up in 20 minutes and a lesson plan you haven't touched. Dean left me the house, but not much else. We didn't have life insurance. We talked about it, put it on the someday list. Someday never came. The mortgage was nearly paid off thanks to Dean's relentless side jobs, but taxes, repairs, and utilities don't mourn with you. They still show up sharp as ever. I picked up extra tutoring hours after school, sold Dean's old tools online, though I kept his hammer. I don't know why. It's rusty and heavy and too large for me to use comfortably, but it feels like his hand is still wrapped around it. Noah's school counselor suggested therapy. I agreed instantly, but he won't talk. He sits in the sessions, swinging his legs, staring out the window. The therapist says it's normal. That silence for kids can be a form of protest or protection. I nodded like I understood. But at night I listen at his door, and what I hear is not silence, it's hurt trying to hide. The hardest part, I can't fall apart. I want to break dishes, scream into the pillows, punch something, but I can't. Because I have to keep Noah safe. Because I'm his whole world now. And even though mine feels like it's crumbling, I have to smile when I hand him lunch. I have to laugh when he shows me his drawings. I have to nod and say, "You're doing great," when he gets through another day without crying. There are moments, just flashes, where I forget Dean is gone. I'll see a truck like his at a red light and my heart leaps before it crashes again. I'll hear the door creak and instinctively turn toward the hallway expecting him, and then I catch myself and feel that shameful sting of hope. I sleep on the couch most nights. Our bedroom feels too big, too haunted. His boots are still by the closet. I can't move them. Not yet. Noah asked me once if his dad knew he died. I didn't know how to answer. So I said I think he knows how much we miss him, and that's what matters most. Noah didn't reply. He just reached over and took my hand. The house is filled with that kind of silence now, not empty but heavy, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. Dean's mother offered to take Noah for a few weeks after the accident. I declined. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I couldn't bear to let him out of my sight. I was terrified something else might happen, that I'd lose him too. My grief made me selfish. My fear made me cling. I don't apologize for that. Some nights I sit in Dean's chair by the fire, scrolling through old voicemails, watching home videos on repeat. Dean's laugh is still the best sound I've ever heard. Deep, warm, the kind of laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants. He used to call Noah Captain Trouble and me Boss Lady, even though he made most of the decisions. He always made me feel like I was in control even when I wasn't. Now every decision falls on me. Do I refinance the house? Do I tell Noah the full truth about the accident or let him build his own version? Do I sell Dean's truck or keep it in the garage rusting and still registered in his name? These are the choices widowhood doesn't prepare you for. Friends stopped coming around after the second month. I don't blame them. People move on. Their lives continue. Mine froze. They don't know what to say anymore. The calls slowed. The texts dried up. At first, they offered support, then advice, then distance. Everyone wants you to be strong. No one wants to sit with you in the weakness. There's a painting in the hallway Dean hung up the week we moved in. It's crooked now. I've left it that way. It reminds me that nothing in this house was ever perfect, but everything was chosen, built, loved. And now I have to protect that. Because there's a storm coming. I feel it in the way Noah flinches at the sound of the doorbell. I feel it in the way the mail has started arriving with names I don't recognize. I feel it in the way my mother's voice tightens when she mentions my half-brother Brent. A man I haven't seen in over a decade. A man who disappeared when responsibility called and only shows up when opportunity knocks. I haven't told Noah about Brent. I haven't told anyone about the strange call I got last week. No name, just a voice saying, "You're not the only one with rights to that house." But I know better. This house was built by Dean's hands, paid for with late nights, missed birthdays, and years of calloused palms. It was never just a house, it was a promise. And now more than ever, I need to keep it. For Dean, for Noah, for myself. Even if that means standing alone against the people who share my blood. Because silence built this house. But I won't be silent anymore. The doorbell rang on a Thursday evening, cold, uninvited, and far too late for visitors. I was halfway through grading spelling tests, the house quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher and Noah's soft humming from his room upstairs. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a package, maybe a stranger needing directions. What I wasn't prepared for was the man standing on the porch dressed in a leather jacket that had seen better decades, duffel bag slung over one shoulder, and that crooked smirk I'd spent most of my life trying to forget. "Hey, Marissa," he said like no time had passed. "You look tired." I froze. It took me a second to recognize him. The last time I saw Brent was at my father's funeral 10 years ago. He was thinner than sharp angles under a loose suit he clearly hadn't chosen himself. He vanished after the reception, didn't even call Mom once in the hospital when her lungs started failing. No birthdays, no holidays, no check-ins. Just silence. Until now. "What are you doing here?" I asked, gripping the edge of the door. He didn't flinch. "Heard Mom's not doing too hot," he said casually. "Figured I'd come by, check on her, check on you and the kid." No mention of Dean. Not a single word about the man we'd buried. Just that smug voice already sizing me up. "I didn't know you even remembered we existed," I replied, voice tight. Brent gave a short laugh. "Well, blood's blood, right?" That line hit wrong. Always did, coming from him. Brent had only ever played the family card when it suited him, when there was money involved or shelter or something worth grabbing before he vanished again. "She's at Maplewood," I said, "assisted care." "Right," he nodded, stepping across the threshold without waiting for an invitation. "You mind if I crash for a few nights?" I should have said no. I should have slammed the door, called someone set a boundary. But grief softens you, makes you second-guess your instincts. And somewhere beneath the anger and mistrust, I felt the familiar tug of duty, the kind bred into daughters who grow up believing their job is to keep the family from falling apart no matter the cost. So I let him in. That night, Brent slept in the guest room at the back of the house, the room that used to be Dean's office. I stood outside the door long after he turned the light off, listening to his breathing, trying to remember the last time I felt safe under my own roof. In the morning, he made coffee. Not well, but the effort was noted. He even packed Noah's lunch, humming to himself in the kitchen like some reformed prodigal brother turned domestic. He didn't ask before opening drawers, though. He didn't knock before walking into the laundry room where I kept Dean's things boxed up in labeled bins. And when I came back from dropping Noah at school, Brent was standing in the garage, hands on his hips, just staring at Dean's truck. "Still not sold, this old thing?" he asked without turning around. "It's not for sale," I replied. He raised his eyebrows. "Just sitting here gathering dust seems like a waste." "Dean built this house," I said, voice flat. "Every board, every brick. That truck is staying." Brent shrugged but didn't push further, at least not out loud. Over the next few days, he made himself comfortable. Too comfortable. He reorganized the spice rack, cleaned the gutters without being asked, repaired a squeaky hinge on the porch door, and waited for me to notice. It all felt off. Brent wasn't the helpful type. He wasn't the type to stick around unless there was something in it for him. And the way his eyes kept scanning the house, pausing on the corners, the ceiling fixtures, the light switches like he was mentally inventorying set me on edge. He never outright mentioned the property. Not at first, but every conversation seemed to bend that way. "This neighborhood's gone up in value, huh? Bet you got a good deal on this place back when. Mom always said she wanted to leave something behind for us." I ignored him. Pretended I didn't hear the bait. But I noticed how he started hovering over my laptop when I worked on bills at the kitchen table, how he casually asked what bank I used when I paid the gas company over the phone, how he started dropping the word inheritance like it was something he'd been robbed of. Then there was the thing with Noah. It happened one evening just after dinner. I was washing dishes, back turned to the living room, when I heard Noah's voice, low and tense. "Please don't." I dried my hands and stepped around the corner just in time to see Brent kneeling beside Noah on the couch, holding something in front of him. A folder, thick, yellow, with a post-it that read "legal." Noah's face was pale, his small hands balled into fists on his lap. "Everything okay?" I asked. Brent smiled too quickly. "Yeah, just showing the little man some of Mom's paperwork. Thought he'd want to know about her will." Noah didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. Later that night, when I tucked him in, he clung to me tighter than usual. "Do I have to share my room?" he whispered. I frowned. "Why would you ask that?" "Uncle Brent said maybe we could knock out the wall and make it bigger. He said you'd be okay with it." I blinked. "Did he say that?" Noah nodded slowly. The next morning, I locked the filing cabinet in the hallway, the one where I kept Dean's will, the deed, my insurance, everything. I didn't care if it offended Brent. I didn't care if he noticed. Something was wrong. The worst part wasn't just the manipulation. It was how quickly Brent inserted himself into Noah's world. He'd pick him up from school without asking, saying it saved me a trip. He'd offer to help with homework and then whisper sarcastic jokes about how Ms. Clark must be the strictest teacher in town. Noah, who was never a nervous kid before, started biting his nails, started locking the bathroom door even when he was brushing his teeth, started leaving lights on in every room he entered. One night I found him curled up under the dining room table. He said it was a fort. But when I crouched down and asked why he was hiding, he didn't answer. Just shrugged and said he liked it better there. Dean used to call Noah his tiny compass. Said the kid could always sense when something was off even before the adults did. Now my compass was spinning out. I started watching Brent more closely, keeping a log in a journal, dates, behaviors, questions he asked. I checked the mailbox for strange letters, credit card offers I didn't sign up for. I called Maplewood to make sure Mom hadn't added Brent to any legal documents. She hadn't. Not yet. But the nurses told me something strange. Brent had visited her twice that week. Alone. Stayed for hours. And after each visit, she seemed more agitated, more confused. "She keeps asking about keys," the head nurse said. "Says she's lost the ones to the house. Keeps insisting she already gave them to someone named Bart." "Brent," I corrected, my stomach sinking. The next day, I changed the locks. Brent came home and found the key didn't work. He laughed when I opened the door, not annoyed, not surprised, just amused. "Little paranoid sis?" I didn't answer. He looked past me into the house. "Nice place," he said again. "Feels like it could use a man's touch, though." My hands curled into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, to demand he leave, but I knew better. Brent thrived on chaos. If I exploded, he'd twist it into proof that I was unstable. He was always better at playing the victim than I was at staying calm. So I nodded, closed the door, and sat on the couch as the lock clicked behind me. This wasn't just about a visit anymore. Brent was circling, and I needed to decide fast whether I was going to wait for him to strike or strike first. It started with little things, misplaced pills, repeated stories, a name forgotten mid-sentence. At first, I thought Mom was just being dramatic. She'd always had a flair for exaggeration, once claimed she had arthritis because she couldn't twist the lid off a jar. But this was different. She began calling Noah by Dean's name. She asked me twice in one conversation where I lived now, even though I reminded her that I'd been in this house for over a decade. Then one day, she didn't recognize me at all. Her eyes went blank just for a second, long enough to make my stomach twist. She's getting worse, the nurse at Maplewood told me, gently holding a clipboard I didn't want to look at. You may want to consider legal guardianship. Someone needs to be empowered to make decisions when she can't. I nodded. I'll talk to our lawyer. But someone else had already beat me to it. 2 days later, I arrived at Maplewood after work flowers in hand, only to find Mom's room empty. Her nurse said, oh, she left early. Her son picked her up, took her to her neurologist appointment. I frowned. I didn't schedule anything. The nurse blinked. No, the other one. Brent. Brent? I left without saying goodbye, drove home faster than I should have. My mind raced with questions. How did he schedule the appointment? When did he even start talking to Mom's doctors? Did he even tell them about her memory issues? What had he signed? What had she signed? When I walked in, Brent was in the kitchen whistling. A stack of papers sat next to his coffee mug. He didn't even flinch when I walked through the door. She's got early onset dementia, he said, flipping through a manila envelope like he was reviewing a restaurant menu. MRI shows hippocampal shrinkage. She probably won't remember your name in 6 months. I stared at him. You took her without telling me. He shrugged. I'm her son too. I picked up the papers. A copy of a guardianship petition. Already notarized. My name was nowhere on it. You're trying to get full control, I whispered. I already have it, he replied, sipping his coffee. Judge signed off this morning. You were too busy teaching spelling words, I guess. The words hit me like a slap. I should have seen it coming. Brent had always been opportunistic, but this was calculated. Cold. And the worst part, legal. Now he had power over her finances, over her medical care, over decisions about what she would have wanted. The next day, he cornered me in the living room with a smirk that made my skin crawl. We should talk about the house, he said. I didn't respond. He leaned against the doorframe like he owned the place. I mean, technically, it was built on family land. Dad left it to Mom. Mom would have wanted it shared. I folded my arms. Dean bought this property before we even got married. It's in my name. He smiled. You sure about that? I narrowed my eyes. What does that mean? Means Mom's memory may be fading, but she remembers telling me once that she gave you the down payment. That makes it a gift, a joint investment, something we should both benefit from. She didn't give me a damn cent, I snapped. Dean and I saved for years. We lived off beans and instant noodles to afford this place. Brent shrugged. Well, memory's a tricky thing. Hers especially. You've been keeping it all for yourself, but I think it's time we start talking about what's fair. Fair! That word. I wanted to laugh. Nothing about Brent's life had ever been fair, at least not to anyone else. He took what he wanted, burned what he left behind, and expected applause. I refused. I'm not selling, I said. This house is Noah's stability. It's where Dean and I built everything. You mean the house you let rot while you drown in bills, he shot back? You're one crack pipe away from foreclosure. Let's be real, Marissa, you need the money. He wasn't wrong, but he didn't get to say it. He stood there waiting for a fight. When I didn't give it to him, he changed tactics. Voice softened. Look, I'm just saying, if we sell now, we split the equity, you can move into something smaller. Closer to Mom. Noah gets a fresh start. Everyone wins. I shook my head. You're not taking this house. That's when his smile disappeared. It's not up to you anymore. He walked off like he'd already won. That night, I stayed up late grading math tests. My back ached. My eyes stung. I just needed to finish, lock the house, and sleep for 3 hours before it all started again. Around midnight, I went upstairs to check on Noah. He was sound asleep, clutching Dean's old flannel shirt like a blanket. I kissed his forehead, closed his door softly, and started toward my bedroom. Then I heard a sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft creak, like someone slowly opening a drawer. I paused. Dean's office door was open. It should have been closed. I always closed it. I stepped inside, heart already hammering. Brent was at Dean's old desk. He didn't hear me at first. He was rifling through papers methodically like he knew exactly what he was looking for. His back was to me, the glow from the desk lamp illuminating the stack of documents he'd laid out. The deed, the appraisal, a copy of Dean's death certificate, and the worst, my marriage license. What the hell are you doing? I demanded. He turned slowly, didn't even try to hide it. Just checking something, he said coolly. I stormed across the room, snatching the papers out of his hands. You're going through my files. Our files, he corrected, Mom's files. I held the documents up. These were Dean's. Mine. Not yours, not Mom's. You don't get to touch them. Brent stood up suddenly, much taller. I have every right to know what's happening with the family estate. This isn't an estate, I hissed. This is my life, my son's life. He leaned in close, his breath sour with whiskey. You don't think I know what this place is worth? You don't think I see what you're trying to hold on to like some martyr widow in a shrine? Get out of this room, I said, voice shaking. He smiled. Or what? You'll cry. Call your PTA friends, tell Mom, who barely remembers what day it is. I didn't answer. I turned, walked to the doorway, and locked the filing cabinet shut behind me. Then I turned to him. Next time you touch my things, I'll call the police. Brent didn't blink. You think they'll listen to you, single mom? Financially strapped, emotional, unstable. My breath caught. There it was. Not just a threat, a plan. He wasn't just here to snoop. He was building a case, quietly, methodically, brick by brick, positioning himself as the rational one, the responsible one, while painting me as fragile. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about power. He was going to use Mom's failing mind as a weapon, twist her memories, forge a narrative, reclaim what was his. And he was willing to step on Noah and me to do it. When he left the office that night, he didn't speak. He just smiled. And for the first time since Dean's funeral, I was more afraid of the living than the dead. It didn't take long for Brent to drop the act. The morning he poured himself coffee from the pot I'd just brewed, he looked up from the mug and said with a half smirk, "You know, Mom always said you were too soft. Never had the spine for real responsibility." I didn't respond. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I was tired. And Brent wasn't looking for a conversation. He was sharpening knives with words. He followed me to the porch where I stood watching Noah wait for the school bus. "She used to say it when you weren't around," Brent continued casually, leaning on the railing, "that Marissa might be good with lesson plans, but when it came to family, she just didn't have what it takes." I turned slowly. "What do you want, Brent?" He smiled like he already owned the answer. "I want you to stop pretending this house belongs to you alone. You're standing in a fantasy. Dean built it, sure, but family land's still family land. You think you deserve the whole pie because your husband had a toolbox and a work ethic." I swallowed my anger. "Dean worked for every inch of this place. I carried bricks while pregnant. We didn't inherit anything, we earned it." He laughed softly. "You think I care about how many bricks you carried? You've always been the sentimental one, Marissa, and sentiment doesn't hold up in probate court." There it was again, the legal language, the precision of someone who'd been doing his research. "I'm not giving you the house," I said, staring straight at him. "I'm not asking," he replied. "I'm telling you that sooner or later you'll have to face the truth. You were never cut out for this. Maybe it's time to hand the keys to someone who is." He walked away before I could answer, but the venom he left behind stayed lodged in my throat for the rest of the day. That night, after Noah was in bed, I found myself knocking on the door of the house next to ours. It was nearly 9 p.m., and the porch light was already off. But when the door opened and Victor emerged, grizzled, quiet, and always in plaid, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. "Can I talk to you?" I asked. He stepped aside, always. Victor wasn't just a neighbor. He was retired law enforcement. 28 years as a homicide detective, and still had the posture and instincts of a man who could read a threat before it took its first breath. We sat at his kitchen table, the same one where I'd once borrowed a cup of sugar, and I told him everything. Not the sugar-coated version I'd given the school counselor, not the half-truth I'd offered my coworkers when they asked how I was coping, the full story. About Brent's sudden arrival, his fixation on the house, the paperwork, the threats dressed up as family concern, the visits to Mom behind my back, the moment I caught him in Dean's office, hands deep in my private files. Victor didn't interrupt. He listened stone-faced, occasionally sipping his lukewarm coffee like it helped him process the layers. When I finished, he leaned back and asked, "You trust your gut?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" He pointed at me. "You've been living with this man in your house. You've watched him with your son. You've heard the tone behind his words. You trust your instincts or not?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. Every alarm in me is blaring." Victor nodded. "Then don't ignore them." He got up and disappeared into a back room, returning with a small black notebook and a pen. "You need to start documenting," he said. "Every incident, every weird comment, times, dates, witnesses if you have them. Courts love paper trails." I nodded, absorbing the advice like water on dry soil. "And lock your files," he added, "not just the cabinet, digitally, and change your passwords twice." I left his house that night with a heavier heart but steadier hands. But it was Noah who shattered me. It was a Wednesday. I remember because I had parent-teacher conferences that ran late. I didn't get home until 8:45. The lights in the house were dim. The air felt stale. Noah was already in his pajamas, curled on the couch with a blanket and a bowl of untouched spaghetti on the coffee table. "Hey, kiddo," I said, sitting next to him. "You okay?" He didn't answer. I brushed his hair back. His skin felt cold. "You didn't eat?" He shook his head. "Are you feeling sick?" He hesitated. Then slowly he pulled his hand from beneath the blanket and held something out. A folded paper, crumpled, edges torn. I unfolded it. It was blank on the outside. Inside, in messy pencil handwriting, it said, "Don't tell Mom, just sign. It's for the family. If you don't sign, she'll be in trouble." I looked up at him. His lower lip trembled. "Noah," I whispered, "where did you get this?" He looked away. "Uncle Brent gave it to me yesterday." I tried to keep my voice calm. "Did you sign anything?" He shook his head violently. "No," he said, "it was just practice. He had a fake knife, but..." My blood turned to ice. "But what?" Noah's voice dropped to a whisper. He took out a real one later. From the drawer. I don't think he saw I was watching. I closed my eyes. Terror roared through my body like a freight train. That was the moment something shifted. No longer was this just about property or control or family resentment. It had crossed a line. Brent had involved my child, manipulated him, threatened him, turned my home, a place Dean built with his bare hands, into a minefield of danger and deceit. I held Noah close that night. He shook in my arms, and I made a vow, silent and searing. This ends here. He will not take another inch. Not of this house. Not of our peace. Not of my son. The next morning, I looked Brent in the eye and said the words I knew he'd been waiting for. Maybe you're right. Maybe we should talk about splitting the house. The effect was immediate. His shoulders dropped half an inch, the tight smirk crept back to his face, and his voice, always just a touch too confident, grew syrupy with condescension. Well, he said, drawing the word out, I'm glad you're finally seeing reason. I nodded. Let him believe it. Let him gloat. Let him think for just a little while that I was breaking. Because that's what he wanted, power. And sometimes the only way to expose a manipulator is to hand them the stage and let them perform. By noon, Brent had printed what he called a preliminary agreement. It was a mock contract full of vague language and intentional traps. He wanted me to sign the first page just to show good faith. The rest, he said, we could work out later with a notary. I smiled and told him I needed time to review it. Then I did what Victor told me to do. I recorded everything. Victor had stopped by the day before with a small flash drive-sized recording device that looked like a USB. Plug it into any outlet in the room where you talk, he said. It auto-records. Doesn't need Wi-Fi. Just keep the conversations natural. He also gave me a second recorder, a button-style pin with a hidden mic, just in case he gets smart. I took no chances. That evening, I invited Brent to sit down at the dining table with 2 cups of coffee and the agreement between us. Noah was at a sleepover. Victor insisted on helping arrange that. You don't want your son anywhere near this part, he'd said. I pressed record on my phone as a backup, then tucked it under a stack of bills and let the audio roll. Brent was cocky. Too cocky. He leaned over the paper, pen in hand, explaining each clause like a TV lawyer trying to impress a jury. Right here, he said, tapping a highlighted section. This gives me a 35% claim to the property value, pretty standard, since Mom's the legal matriarch, and you're just her caretaker now. I kept my face neutral. And this part, he continued, just says that any remaining equity after taxes or sale will be split according to heirs, me and you. I pointed to the fine print. What's this line mean? In the event of incapacity by current residents, primary guardianship of dependent minors shall transfer to I, and then it's blank. He waved it off. Just legal lingo. We can fill that in later. I nodded again, pretended I didn't know what he was doing. When he left the room to take a call, I snapped photos of the documents, emailed them to myself, and backed them up to a cloud Victor set up for me under a pseudonym, Evelyn Price. He said abusers often erase digital trails. If he figures out you're fighting back, he'll try to wipe you clean. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went to Victor's garage at 6 a.m., still in my sweatshirt and slippers, holding a thermos of black coffee and my voice recorder. We played the audio back on his old laptop, heard every word Brent had said, heard him claim legal standing, heard him lie about Mom's intentions, heard him scoff at Dean's death like it was a bump in his plans. Victor clicked pause. That's coercion, he said, especially with the clause about Noah. But he hasn't made him sign anything, not yet. Victor looked at me. He will. He picked up the phone and called someone named Darren, a contact from his days on the force. Family court specialist, he told me. If we're going to stop this, we need to prove intent to defraud, not just pressure. But the smoking gun came 2 days later, tucked inside a folder at Maplewood Senior Center. Victor and I visited under the pretense of bringing Mom a new set of slippers. While I sat with her making small talk as she drifted in and out of awareness, Victor quietly spoke to the administrator and asked to review her file. A half-hour later, he returned with eyes like flint. We've got it, he said as we walked to the parking lot. He used a forged consent form to request durable power of attorney. I stopped in my tracks. Forged? Yep. Signature doesn't match any of her other medical records, and the witness line blank. My stomach churned. Victor pulled out a copy he'd snapped with his phone. This isn't sloppy. This is deliberate. He planned it. Probably coached her on what to say if anyone asked, or hoped no one would. What does that mean legally? It means the guardianship is invalid, he said. And if we can prove he used that status to try and transfer or threaten the transfer of property, then we've got him. I exhaled dizzy from the rush of fury and relief. But Brent wasn't finished. The next day, I found another envelope on the kitchen counter tucked under my phone. Inside was a document titled Provisional Family Property Transfer. The heading was embossed, official looking. But what turned my blood cold was the signature line at the bottom. Signature of minor beneficiary Noah Clark. I stared at it for a long time. My hands shook. I read and reread the clause's boilerplate language disguised as kindness. It referred to preservation of family unity, minimizing legal costs, honoring the wishes of the matriarch. But all of it funneled to one thing: Noah relinquishing any future claim to the house. And below the signature line was a blank. Noah hadn't signed yet, but Brent was going to try again. He'd already started with threats and practice forms, and now with this in hand, he was ready to use Noah as a pawn in his long game. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I scanned the document, sent it to Victor, printed 3 copies, and placed the original in a fireproof lockbox I'd bought the same day I changed the locks. That night, I lay awake in Dean's chair, staring at the ceiling and repeated one sentence over and over. You picked the wrong mother to mess with. Because I wasn't just going to protect my home anymore. I was going to expose him. All of him. With every lie, every forgery, every paper trail he thought I wouldn't trace. And this time, I wouldn't be alone. I waited until the house was quiet. Until Noah was asleep and the lights were low and the smell of dinner had faded from the air. I stood in the hallway outside the dean's office and listened to Brent moving around inside. Folders shuffling, a drawer creaking shut. His rhythm was careless now, arrogant. He thought I'd surrendered. I pushed open the door. He didn't look up, just said, "If you're here to talk terms again, bring a pen." "I'm not here to talk terms," I replied. He turned slowly, arms folded. His face looked older in the low light, but not softer. That smirk never aged. "So what is this then, another speech about your dead husband's hammer and how this house is sacred ground? You forged Mom's signature," I said flatly. He blinked. I watched him recalculate, quick, precise. "That's a serious accusation, sis." "It's not an accusation," I said. "It's a fact. I saw the documents. I saw the witness line. Blank. You filed for guardianship with fabricated consent, which means everything you've done with that authority is invalid." He scoffed. "You don't even understand how guardianship works." "Jesus, Marissa. You teach multiplication tables. I've studied the law. I know how to write agreements that hold up." "Not when they're built on fraud," I snapped. He moved toward me, slow and deliberate. "You really want to do this. You want to get a judge involved. You want your kid dragged into depositions and evaluations and cross-examinations. You think you'll walk out of court with your dignity intact." I didn't move. "I will burn you down," he said quietly. "Not out of spite, just business. You're standing on equity, Marissa. You're a desperate single mom in a house you can't afford. Meanwhile, I've got a legal document and a sick old woman who can't remember what day it is but still thinks you're a selfish brat." I met his eyes. "You've always underestimated me." He laughed. "No, I know exactly what you are. Emotional, weak. The kind of woman who thinks being right matters more than being smart. Then you're going to hate what happens next." He tilted his head. "I called a lawyer." He stopped laughing. "His name is Michael Royce. He's with Walker and Thomas, specializes in property disputes and elder abuse. We have an appointment at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and I've already given him copies of everything." Brent's face changed, not fear, not shock, but irritation. Like a man forced to clean up a mess he thought he'd already buried. "You have no idea what you've started," he muttered. "I do," I said. "I started the process of taking back my life." He pointed at me. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." "You already did," I said and walked out. In the morning, I dropped Noah off at school and drove downtown to a modest brick building tucked between a coffee shop and an accountant's office. Michael Royce looked like a man who knew how to dismantle people quietly. Mid-50s, crisp suit, kind eyes but not soft. I told him everything. The forged guardianship, the fake property agreement, the intimidation, the psychological warfare. He listened carefully, asked precise questions, took detailed notes. When I showed him the audio and the photo of the forged signature, he leaned back and said, "This isn't just a property case. This is premeditated fraud. Maybe coercion. Maybe attempted exploitation of a minor." I blinked. "That's a thing." He nodded. "In Colorado, trying to manipulate a child into relinquishing future inheritance rights, even if the document doesn't go through, can fall under financial endangerment of a minor, especially if it involves deception or emotional pressure." "I have evidence," I said, "and I have a witness." He looked pleased. "You have more than most." Then he leaned forward. "I'll draft the first filing today. A civil injunction to freeze any transfer or sale attempts on the house and a formal request to revoke Brent's guardianship petition. But you need to be ready." "For what?" "For war," he said. "People like your brother, when they realize they're not as clever as they think, they don't back down. They double down. Expect retaliation, lies, smear tactics. You're going to need support." I thought of Noah, of Victor, of Dean's face in the photo on the hallway wall. "I have it," I said, "and I'm not afraid." But that wasn't entirely true. Because that night, as I sat on the edge of Noah's bed watching him draw spaceships on the back of a math worksheet, I saw something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. A dullness. Like part of his brightness had flickered out. "Did something happen at school?" I asked gently. He shook his head. "I just don't feel like talking." I touched his shoulder. "Anything you want to tell me, you can." He kept drawing. "I know." Later, I found the drawing crumpled in the trash. It wasn't a spaceship. It was a house split down the middle. On one side was me smiling, holding hands with a stick figure version of him. On the other side was Brent larger, looming with red ink where the hands should be. The house in the middle had flames on the roof. That's when I called Dr. Ramirez. She was the school's child psychologist. I'd known her for years, referrals, consultations, parent meetings, but this was the first time I'd ever said I need help for my son. She met with Noah that week. When she called me afterward, her voice was calm but firm. He's internalizing the conflict, she said. He doesn't know who to trust, so he's shutting down. He needs routine, safety, and he needs to see you fight for him, not just against Brent, but for his heart. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table until the sun went down. Everything in the house was silent, too silent. Dean's hammer was still hanging above the doorframe, the one he carved our initials into when Noah was born. I reached up, touched the wood, and whispered, "I'm trying." And then I cried. Quiet, private, bone-deep sobs that never reached my throat but rattled my ribs. I cried because Brent had stolen something I couldn't get back, not just legal rights or a piece of property, but Noah's innocence. His belief that home meant safety. His trust that grown-ups told the truth. His sense that life, while fragile, was still fair. I cried until the tears stopped. And then I got up and kept going. Victor was already waiting when I got home that morning. He stood on my front porch, arms folded, wearing that old bomber jacket from his detective days, and a look that said something had cracked open. I unlocked the door and let him in. "Don't take your shoes off," he said. "We won't be staying long." "What happened?" He handed me a small black recording device. "I left this in your living room yesterday," he said. "Under the sofa between the leg and the baseboard. It picked up everything last night." I didn't ask why he'd done it. I knew exactly why. "Play it," I whispered. He connected it to a Bluetooth speaker and hit play. Static, then footsteps. Then Brent's voice. Low, calm, manipulative. "I told you she's cracking," he said. "She called some cheap lawyer downtown. Thinks she can outmaneuver me with a couple of sob stories and a dead husband." A pause, a man's voice, slippery, salesy. "Well, the deed's the only issue, really. Title's a mess, but if you can get her to sign just one waiver, we can proceed. Otherwise, you'll need a power of attorney from the mom." "Brent, I already got that. Or something close enough. Old signature, new date. She can't tell Tuesday from Thanksgiving. Just need a notary who doesn't ask questions." Victor pressed pause. My hands were clenched so tight my knuckles had gone white. "You know who that is?" he asked. "The man." Victor nodded. "No," I said, "but Brent clearly does." Victor tapped his phone and pulled up an image. "Name's Carter Evans, disbarred in 2 states. Used to run title scams in Vegas. Now he floats, works with people looking to launder shady real estate under family names. Shows up, collects fake paperwork, takes a cut." My stomach turned. "So Brent brought him in to sell the house?" I asked. "More than that," Victor said. "He's laundering it. The house wouldn't go on the open market. It'd transfer to a shell LLC. Brent walks away clean with cash, and you and Noah are out on the street." The walls of the house suddenly felt thinner. "Do we have enough?" I asked. "Not yet," Victor replied. "We need the bank." "If Brent really brought your mom in." "He did," I said. "She was gone for 5 hours yesterday. He said they were getting lunch." Victor nodded. "Then we go now." We drove across town in his pickup. At the bank, I didn't even have to explain. The branch manager, a woman named Carla, recognized me instantly. She'd known Dean. "I remember your husband," she said softly. "Always brought Noah in with a baseball cap and a chocolate milk." Her voice hardened. "And I saw your brother yesterday." Victor stepped forward. "Ma'am, we believe Brent Clark may have brought in your client under false pretenses and signed documents under power of attorney. We need to see what was filed." Carla's eyes narrowed. "I can't release copies without a subpoena." "I'm not asking for copies," Victor said. "I'm asking you to check your security footage. Did the woman appear lucid? Did she sign of her own will? Or did Brent control the interaction?" Carla hesitated. "I'll look." 10 minutes later, she called us into her office. A large monitor on the wall showed grainy footage of the teller area. The timestamp read 2:13 p.m. the day before. Brent stood at the counter. Mom stood beside him. She was confused, squinting, turning in circles. Her mouth moved, but the audio wasn't available. Then the teller handed over a document. Brent placed it on the counter, pressed Mom's hand down gently. He pointed at the line. Mom looked up. Brent nodded once, sharp and impatient. She signed. Then he took the paper and smiled at the camera. Victor exhaled. "That's coercion at the very least, possibly forgery depending on what was signed." Carla nodded grimly. He brought in a transfer request. Name on the document is Bethel Clark Family Holdings. Never heard of it. I flagged it. Said I'd call the branch manager. He got agitated, then said he'd come back tomorrow. She turned to me. "He was trying to move the deed, wasn't he?" I nodded. "We'll hold it," she said. "He's not getting another step forward." Victor gave her his card. "If he comes back, you call me." Back at the house, I pulled every file I'd been collecting, every photo, every clip, every scribbled note from Noah about what Brent had said to him. Then I opened my laptop and drafted the email to Michael Royce. I labeled the folder Evidence, Urgent. The audio file from the living room, the photo of the forged guardianship form, the footage from the bank, and finally, a short video. Victor helped me edit the clip where Brent told me I wasn't strong enough, that the law was his playground, that I would lose everything. Michael called me within 20 minutes. "I'm filing this with the court in the morning," he said. "You're going to need to appear. This is now a civil petition for injunctive relief and criminal referral for property fraud. And frankly, you've got a damn solid case." I thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. So tired. That night, Noah came into my room with his blanket and didn't say anything. He curled up next to me. I brushed his hair back and listened to the sound of his breath slowly even out. We were closer to the end of this nightmare, but the storm hadn't passed yet. Not by a long shot. I should have known he wouldn't disappear quietly. By the next morning, Brent had stopped talking, stopped slamming doors, stopped slinging barbed comments across the kitchen like he always did. He moved like a shadow, too still, too quiet, too polite. It was the calm you feel in the woods right before something lunges. Victor warned me. "Cornered animals bite," he said, pacing my living room with one hand still on his old service weapon. He knows he's trapped. That makes him twice as dangerous. We'd filed everything. The court date was set. The injunctions were active. The property couldn't be touched. The power of attorney was suspended pending investigation. But it didn't matter. Brent wasn't playing by legal rules anymore. That night, I double-checked every lock in the house. I moved Noah to my bedroom and placed a chair under the doorknob even though the door had a deadbolt. Victor slept on the couch. "You think he'll come tonight?" I asked him. He didn't answer right away, just stared at the hallway. If he knows it's over, yes. The wind picked up around 2:10 a.m. I remember the creak. Not loud, but unmistakable. A floorboard in the hallway, the one that always groaned under Dean's boots. I reached for my phone. Then came the second sound, a whisper of fabric brushing against wood. Closer this time. I sat up. Victor was already moving, silent, trained fast. Then a scream, Noah's. The door to his old room, now an unused guest room, was half open. I bolted toward it just as Victor kicked the door the rest of the way in. And there he was. Brent, standing over Noah's bed, holding a knife in one hand and a clipboard in the other. His mouth was open mid-command. Noah was pressed against the headboard, shaking. "Don't move," Victor shouted. Brent spun around, startled but not retreating. His face contorted into something almost inhuman. All charm and civility were gone. "This is my house," he roared. "She's stolen everything, that boy. He's not even hers to protect." Victor raised the pistol. "Drop the knife, Brent." But he didn't. Instead, he lunged, straight at me. I felt the heat of his body before I felt the force of the blow. He knocked me to the floor, knife slicing through the air where my shoulder had been seconds earlier. Victor tackled him. There was a thud, then the sound of a body hitting drywall, a sharp yelp, and the knife skidding across the floor. I scrambled up, grabbed Noah, and pulled him out of the room. Victor had Brent pinned, one knee in his back, the clipboard crumpled under their feet. I saw papers fluttering, the fake transfer deed, another forged signature, a fake notary stamp. Sirens screamed in the distance. "Call them off," Brent barked, twisting beneath Victor's grip. "I'll sue you, assaulted me. You have no right." "You broke in with a weapon," Victor said, calmly cuffing Brent with a zip tie from his pocket. "You threatened a minor, and you forged a transfer of title from a legal dependent. You're done." I held Noah tightly in the hallway. He was crying, but silent the way only children cry when they know something has shattered. Officers arrived 3 minutes later. Guns drawn, flashlights blazing. Victor raised his hands, immediately identifying himself. Brent was hauled up from the floor, still thrashing, still spitting threats. "This is a setup," he screamed. "She manipulated the whole thing. She tricked our mother. She seduced the court. She's a liar." The officers ignored him. One of them knelt beside me, asked if we were okay, asked if I needed medical attention. "I'm fine," I whispered. "My son, he needs a hospital." But not for wounds. For peace. They walked Brent out of the house in cuffs. His hand still clutched a corner of that fake deed, creased, bloodied at the edge. And then he was gone. Victor stayed with us until dawn. We didn't talk, just sat, in the silence left behind. The news spread faster than I expected. By morning, our street was cordoned off, neighbors whispering behind curtains. Brent's name lit up local news tickers with charges that sounded like the script of a crime show: forgery, attempted unlawful possession of real estate, endangering the welfare of a minor, unlawful entry, and aggravated intimidation. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, a cup of cold coffee between my hands, while Noah colored silently in the next room. His lines were more careful now, slower, as if he understood that staying inside the lines was a kind of control. Victor came by with updates. He'd spoken to the DA's office. Brent had been processed overnight. He's trying to downplay everything Victor said, claims he was defending his legal interests, said the knife was for his own safety, said he was misled about the property rights. I didn't respond. My heart wasn't in rage anymore. It was in exhaustion. But the court needed more than fatigue. So I gave them fire. At the pre-trial hearing, I sat across from Brent for the first time since the night of the attack. He looked smaller now, dressed in beige corrections khaki, no belt, no swagger, no clipboard, but still smirking. "Michael, my attorney, had prepared me. You'll need to testify." Not just about the attack, about the pattern, the manipulation, the psychological toll, the danger to Noah. I nodded, but I wasn't ready for how hard it would be. They brought me to the stand. I raised my right hand, sworn in, and looked out at the courtroom, quiet, watching. Then I told them everything. From the day Brent walked in flashing fake concern and backhanded compliments, to the forged papers, the financial coercion, the way he stared at Noah too long and used legal jargon like a weapon. I watched my son unravel, I said, not because of some stranger on the street, but because of his own blood. A man who used our pain as leverage, who saw grief not as something to comfort, but to capitalize on. I looked at the jury, steady, clear. He told me I was weak, that the law was his tool, that mothers like me lose. I paused, but I didn't lose, because weakness isn't in having fear, it's in choosing cruelty, and I refuse to raise a child who believes that's ever a form of strength. Brent rolled his eyes, but the jurors didn't. When I stepped down, I felt taller than I had in months. The court-appointed psychiatrist gave testimony next about Brent's predatory behavior, patterns, his hyper-control fixation, his documented lies under oath, and the increased likelihood of future manipulation if not restrained by law. Then came the sentencing hearing. 7 years. No parole before 5. The courtroom didn't erupt. There were no cheers, no gasps. Just a quiet exhale. I walked out holding Noah's hand. Outside the courthouse, Victor leaned against his car, arms crossed. "He'll appeal," he said. "That kind of man always does." "I know. But the record's clean, and your son's safe." I nodded. That was all that mattered. Mom didn't understand the verdict. Her memory was fragmented now, days skipping like scratched CDs. But the court ruled she'd be transferred to a state-licensed care facility with neurological therapy and full oversight. I visited her a week later. She looked up at me with hollow eyes and said, "Is it spring?" "It's getting there," I said. "Dean coming for dinner?" I swallowed. "No, Mama, it's just us now." She nodded as if that made sense. Noah's therapy sessions began that same week. Dr. Ramirez focused on routine drawing, storytelling, anything that helped him externalize the trauma without reliving it. He asked questions sometimes like, "What happens to people who lie, or do houses forget bad things?" I told him the truth, and I told him no house forgets. But that doesn't mean we have to keep living in its memory. So I started packing, not because I'd lost, but because I'd won. And I wanted that victory to mean forward motion. We left that house on a Sunday morning. Dean's hammer stayed behind. But I carried the frame that held our first family photo. Bent, water damaged, but whole. We moved across town into a 2-bedroom cottage with creaky floors and sun-warmed windows. No ghosts, no hidden papers, no door that creaked under the weight of another man's ambitions. Just me and my boy. And silence. The good kind. I thought it would be harder to say goodbye. But the truth was the house had already let me go. Long before the moving truck pulled into the driveway. Long before I took down the wind chimes Dean had built from scrap copper. Long before I emptied the last drawer and stood in Noah's old room with the fading pencil marks still carved into the doorframe. It had let me go the moment I realized survival wasn't the same as healing. And healing doesn't always grow in the soil of memory. The realtor was gentle, respectful. She didn't push for staging or touch-up paint. She understood this wasn't a transaction. It was a severance. "You sure about this?" Victor asked as we loaded the final box into his truck. I looked up at the home where Dean had once hammered in floorboards, barefoot, laughing with dust in his hair. Where Noah had taken his first step. Where I had collapsed more than once behind locked doors I didn't want to open. "I'm sure," I said. We signed the papers the next morning. No ceremony, no photo with keys. Just a check, a quiet notary, and a line in the sand. I used part of the money to pay off every debt I'd been dragging like an anchor behind me. Then I searched quietly, deliberately for someplace new. I didn't need grandeur. I needed safety, simplicity, and a front porch that faced east so I could drink coffee while watching the sunrise over something I hadn't yet survived. I found it on the edge of Colorado Springs, off a 2-lane road that wound through pine trees and wild grass. The cottage was half the size of our old place. 2 bedrooms, no garage, a tiny wood stove in the living room that creaked when it got too hot. But it was enough. Noah helped me unpack one box at a time. He claimed the smaller room without being asked and taped a picture of Saturn to the window. "Why this house?" he asked, lying on his back on the bare floor that first night. I thought for a moment. "Because it doesn't know our pain," I said, "and it's small enough for joy to fill every room." He nodded like that made sense. And maybe it did. I spent the next few weeks breathing slower. No threats, no lawyers, no one trying to outwit me at my own dinner table. It was the first time I could feel my body again. My breath, my pace, the weight lifting without fanfare. Noah's drawings changed too. Gone were the storm clouds and broken houses. Now it was stars and tiny homes tucked in hills. He laughed more, slept better, and one day unprompted he said I don't dream about him anymore. I didn't ask who. I just pulled him into my arms and said, "Me neither." But healing, I discovered, was not just personal. It was communal. It was the ache in other women's eyes when they passed you in the grocery store and somehow recognized something familiar. It was the tremble in the voice of a single mom on the phone with her bank apologizing for being late on a payment. It was the silence of the women who had swallowed threats, rewritten memories, pretended they were over it. And I couldn't stay quiet anymore. So one night after Noah was asleep and the house was still, I opened my laptop and started writing. I called it Silent Bravery. It wasn't a blog about survival tips. It wasn't polished or pretty. It was raw, real. Titled posts like, "He used my grief as a contract my son signed with fear in his eyes. I didn't lose, he just didn't win." I hit publish and walked away. The next morning, I had 12 messages. By the end of the week, over 300. Most were women, some men. All of them quiet warriors who'd lived through storms of their own and were finally ready to talk. One woman wrote, "I never thought about taking my story to court. I thought I just had to survive it." Another, "Thank you for reminding me that silence isn't the same as peace." I cried reading every one, but not out of sadness, out of solidarity. Victor called me a few weeks later, chuckling. "You're famous, you know?" "I'm not." "Silent Bravery got picked up by a local radio show. They want to interview you." I hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm ready." Victor said, "Then say that. That's part of the bravery too." I agreed to do it. They called and asked gentle questions. I told them about grief and knives in the night and my son's drawings of burning houses. But I also told them about porch lights and fresh paint and the way healing whispers before it roars. After the segment aired, the messages doubled. Silent Bravery became a place not just for my voice, but for theirs. And in every post, every reply, every shared scar, something changed. Not the past, but the meaning of it. Noah came home from school one day with a project titled "The Strongest Thing I Know." He drew a picture of a tree, roots deep, branches broken in places but still reaching. He wrote beneath it, "My mom, because she grows even after storms." I pinned it to the fridge. And for the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror not as the woman who lost a husband, fought a brother, or escaped a house, but as someone who stood still in the middle of fire and didn't burn. The bus pulled away in a cloud of summer dust, and I stood there waving, watching Noah press his hand to the window. 3 fingers curled, 2 spread. Our secret sign, "I'm safe, I promise." He was headed to a week-long grief camp tucked into the foothills above Denver. A quiet place built for loud emotions where kids who had lost something could find themselves in the echoes of others. I didn't cry, because he didn't. He was ready. At orientation, he stood up in front of 25 other kids and introduced himself not with the story of what he'd lost, but of what he'd lived through. "My name is Noah Clark. I'm 9. And last year someone tried to take my house and scare me into signing papers. But my mom stopped them. And now we live somewhere new and it's quiet and it feels like we get to start over." The counselor told me later that he used the phrase "start over" 3 times in one paragraph, that he smiled when he said it, that he made another kid laugh by comparing forged property deeds to cartoon villains in disguise. He was healing, not just with help but with words. And that somehow was the legacy Dean left, not the floorboards or the garden hose or the smell of sawdust that still lingered in my dreams, but this boy, this heart, this courage. Meanwhile, Silent Bravery kept growing. It wasn't a movement, not yet, but it was something better, a ripple. And that ripple reached someone I never expected. Her name was Avery Chen, 27, newly licensed attorney, daughter of a woman who'd lost her family home after being manipulated into signing over half the deed to her brother's business partner. Avery found the blog by accident, but her message was intentional. "If you're willing," she wrote, "I'd like to start a pro bono program for women like your readers. No one should need to choose between silence and shelter." I met her at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. She had a legal pad filled with scribbles and questions. She asked about the injunctions, about the court response, about the community reaction. But then she asked the real question. "What was the moment you knew you were going to fight back?" I paused. "It wasn't when he forged the paper," I said. "It was when my son said he didn't feel safe." That made it simple. Avery nodded. "Then let's make it simple for others too." We called it the Bravery Project. She handled the legal structure. I handled the words. We didn't raise millions, we didn't go viral, we didn't wear capes. But in the first 6 months, we stopped 4 illegal evictions, blocked 2 fraudulent property transfers, and walked with 3 women through the courtroom as they told their truth out loud on the record without fear. Every victory felt like Dean hammering something into place all over again. And then one day, after Noah had gone to bed and the dishes were stacked and the cat was asleep on the windowsill, I sat down with a notebook I hadn't touched in years. It was the one I used to write love letters in, to Dean, when he was still on the roof with a drill and a crooked grin. I opened to a blank page, and I began. "Dean, you'd hate this paper. It's too soft. You liked legal pads and mechanical pencils, not ink that smudges. But it's what I have. The house is gone. I know that might hurt to read. I wanted to keep it. I really did. But it started to hurt more than it helped. And you told me once that a house is just walls. Love is what we build inside it. I built something else now, something quieter, something safer. Noah's taller. He still draws spaceships, but now they land on planets he names himself. He asked if you'd be proud of him. I told him yes, every day, even on the messy ones. Brent's gone. He's serving time. I don't hate him. I wish I could. But I think hating him would tie me to him longer than I want to stay, so I'm letting that go. But I'm holding on to the promise. You told me once, whatever happens, don't let the world take my boy. It tried, but I didn't. He's here, whole, healing. And maybe so am I. Love, Marissa. I folded the letter, placed it in the fire, not to forget, but to release. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the wind chimes I had finally hung beside the back porch. They sang sharp and soft, each note layered with memory. I stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, and whispered the only 3 words that ever felt like enough. I'm still here. And the world, it seemed, whispered back, so am I.